WNST, Stanley Cup playoffs, Orioles in season, the NFL draft, and the aftermath, and the Ravens off season. But I'm going to stop everything right now in a little Kelly Green and Gold time capsule. And I don't mean Dundalk High School, which was also Kelly Green and Gold, or the Green Bay Packers in our road trip that we're taking out to Green Bay with our WNST trips. But I'm talking about the Oakland A's, who were the first team I ever hated. And I mean the kind of hatred that only a 4, 5, 6-year-old boy who loved baseball could have. They were the first team I hated because my dad hated them. And this book came to my desk. I'm holding it up on our YouTube and our Facebook Live. It's called Dynastic, Bombastic, Fantastic: The Story of Reggie Raleigh Catfish and Charlie Finley's Swingin' A's of the 1970s. He wrote the book, The Baseball Codes, and we're going to talk about Manny Machado and flying bats and fisticuffs. Jason Turbo is the author. He's going to join us here for a little time capsule of the first team I hated, the 1972, 73, 74 Oakland A's. Dude, you've done a great job. I mean, anybody that can hold me into a book, you can even see the shorn pages here in the first. I'm about 120 pages deep into this thing. They haven't won anything yet. They're fighting with the Detroit Tigers, but I've really enjoyed your book, my man. So good work. Good work.
Thank you, Nestor. So you haven't reached the part where they beat the Orioles in the playoffs?
I lived through that. So that's what made me hate them so much, my man. So, dude, Charlie Finley. So, full disclosure for me, I covered baseball for 21 years. Obviously, you know my last name. The old man that owns the team here threw me out of the press box 11 years ago because I had the audacity to ask questions. I'm a historian. I've read Lords of the Realm. I keep up on the Jackie Robinson stuff. And Charlie Finley was really the first sort of goofy, modern owner that we all have seen the spokes of, whatever your Mark Cuban or whatever your Peter Angelos or George Steinbrenner or even, the Al Davises. It really, the seed of this was all planted by old Charlie, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, Charlie was the elephant in whatever room he happened to be in. And when that room was full of Major League Baseball owners who were generally a kind of quiet and steady bunch, he stood out even more. The guy was chock full of ideas, both good and bad, and not shy about making his opinion known.
I remember the orange baseballs. I was of that age when we played with green tennis balls. There were white tennis balls for Clay. There were orange tennis balls. But he wanted to play with an orange baseball. But he managed to take his brand and, even for another 20 years, baseball didn't brand itself as well as it probably should when you consider how much money they're all making now off of all of these branding initiatives and throwback jerseys. But they had the first gaudy, tacky thing that begat every sunburst Nolan Ryan, Houston Astros, Jose Cruz jersey. I am wearing, for your pleasure, Jason Turbo, my white panel 1983 Lowenstein, Rick Dempsey Oriole hat. But, they really set off fashion trends that we still battle at all the major North American sports, right?
Oh, yeah, left and right. I mean, Finley was the first one really to introduce colors at all back in the early 60s when he first bought the A's and ran them in Kansas City, claiming at the time that, once automobiles were all black, and then they realized along the way that people like color in their cars, and now look at cars, they're all colorful. He introduced a muted version of what became, a polyester horror show in Oakland. In 72, the colors exploded in the greens and the yellows and the wedding gown whites.
Well, and the shoes. I mean, they were the first team to really make the shoes match. I mean, every baseball team for 130 years wore gray on the road. They didn't wear gray shoes, right? I mean,
no. He dressed them in white cleats that he insisted were made from albino kangaroos. And when he had
a lot of crap with him, didn't he? I mean, like if anybody would say the modern expression would be he had a lot of poop with him, didn't he?
Yeah, he had chutzpah, that's for sure. He bought the NHL's California Golden Seals. He dressed them in white spikes too, or white skates, as it were. The guy had many ideas about appropriate sartorial direction. But this is also the team with the facial hair. I mean, it didn't end with the uniforms. The baseball hadn't seen facial hair in over a half century till these A's came along in 72. Reggie Jackson showed up at spring training with a mustache. Several of his teammates hated the idea, couldn't convince him to shave, and came up with the idea that, if we can't get Reggie to shave, we'll grow our own mustaches. Finley will see it. He'll order us all to shave at once, and we'll move along our way. Finley, being Finley, saw it and sensed a promotional opportunity, quickly decreed that anyone with a mustache by June 18th, the day of the team picture, would have a $300 bonus coming their way, to which Ken Holtzman said, for $300, I will grow hair on my feet. And sure enough, June 18th, everyone had mustaches, and a new trend was born. Within a couple of years, everybody in baseball was shaggy. And that year's World Series, of course, between the A's and the very clean-cut Cincinnati Reds, came to be known as the Hairs versus the Squares.
All right, man, so I need some background on you. If this conversation is going to go anywhere, we need to know where our commonality is, because I don't know you at all. I know your work. I know your previous book as well, and you can follow Jason's work out on Twitter at Dynastic Book. The book is Dynastic, Bombastic, Fantastic. It is the story of the early 1970 Oakland A's. I should tell you, Jason, I'm a little twisted. My favorite all-time sports book is not Ball 4 or The Bronx Zoo or anything that would be my favorite book is Mike Shropshire's Seasons in Hell, the story of the Texas Rangers, which, no offense, your book's not as good as his book, but it's on the same sort of scope in that it was all in an era where I was 5, 6, 7 years old. I was in love with baseball. It's why Peter Angelos hates my guts, because I like baseball more than he does. I fell in love with it back in that time in my life, and I just didn't fall in love with the Orioles. My cousin played for the Red Sox when I was a very young boy, so I had a little affinity for the Red Sox. But I love the hats. I love the colors. I love the helmets. I love the Slurpees that came in the hats at the Royal Farm Store. They had the ices that came in the hats, just like they did at the stadium with the soft serve ice cream. I loved hot dogs. I loved playing ball. I loved t-ball. I loved collecting baseball cards. And, dude, the A's for me were ISIS. They were the Antichrist. I mean, they really were. As a 4-year-old sports fan who had a dad that was fanatical about teaching me baseball and hitting the cutoff man and all of those axioms I've used for my life. Boy, they were a stacked, incredible team, and the breakup of them 5 years later, parts that, like Holtzman and Jackson, that came to Baltimore in different ways, and Hunter, who the Orioles had to deal with in New York, and Holtzman was involved, from the Yankees side with everything that became McGregor and Dempsey and that big Yankees trade in '77 that we had here as well. All of my childhood, but the A's, boy, there were so many great players. They defined like the baseball card collecting for me, but they were sort of on the other side of evil, and Charlie was always in the news trying to sell off Joe Rudy. And imagine my dad trying to explain that to me at 8 years old, Jason, right?
It's almost impossible. And you hit on something I think that's important with Finley and with that era. I mean, the era of those A's championships coincided with the advent of first arbitration and then free agency. That was when baseball reportage moved from the field to the courtroom. Like, suddenly baseball reporters had to figure out how to speak legalese and how to talk about financial arrangements and financial structures and things that really had nothing to do with baseball.
Well, that somebody was making a hell of a lot of money off of this, and the players all looked at each other and said, it's not us, right? I mean, Kurt Flood and, all of the angst, all the acrimony, but really, that's when the beans started to get counted, right? That's when people came in and said, how much is Augie Busch making? Steve Carlton, and we'll just deal you off to Philadelphia because they suck and your life will be miserable. And the owners really were lords of the realm, like the Hellier's book would say. Players were wildly mistreated, and Finley was a huge, weird part of all of that. But the guy sort of kind of wanted to play for him, even though he was a real jerk, right? I mean, as a person.
Well, they wanted to play for him because he knew how to put together a winner. And these guys, all the players on those A's teams, were pretty well ensconced. They never much like Charlie Finley, but they did like living in Northern California. They loved the fact that they would get World Series bonuses every year, which Charlie Finley always tried to count as straight salary for them when they came to time to negotiate contracts in an arbitration. He always claimed that the extra $20,000 or so they made from the World Series was coming out of his pocket, even though it never was. Yeah, he was the loudest voice in the room decrying the advent of arbitration. He said, "Give them whatever they want. Don't give them that," because he knew that was one step toward an inexorable process wherein someone like him, who thrived on calling every shot in his organization. I mean, the guy was a megalomaniac. He wore so many hats in the A's front office, including general manager.
Dude, there was some crazy number you had where he had like 8 total employees or something like in 1970. I mean, it was like crazy, right? What's the number?
Office.
What year?
The front office was run by 7 people in 1974, when the year of their 3rd World Championship. It wasn't just Finley wearing every hat. I talked to their PR guy, Jimmy Bank. Was actually one of the few people who I talked to who didn't have many bad things to say about Charlie Finley, but he quit his job because Finley made him the full-time traveling secretary in addition to being the full-time PR guy, and then he made him the full-time statistician on top of all of that, which meant that he got 6 hours to himself a day, and that was just untenable. Man, this organization was run like nothing else in baseball, and it trickled down to the players. I mean, they were getting short-shrifted on every end as far as contracts go. And when arbitration came around, aside from giving them a say in their own future, they suddenly knew how much everyone else around the league was making for the first time. And that was when they first realized, holy cow, we are dramatically underpaid.
Yeah, Charlie just kind of threw in the towel in the end, right? I mean, like, they had won enough. He had enough fun. He never really got rich off of it, not in the modern vernacular where, Peter Angelo's pulled $29 million out and he's going to cash out at about $3 billion by the time it's all over with 25 years later, while wrecking the franchise, by the way. But, it is amazing how many bad, ill human beings have owned baseball teams over the years, right? Like, that the stories that come back are borderline absurd, from the Peter Angeloses and the Steinbrenners and the Finleys to the Marge Schatz, and the Loria and what's going on in the modern vernacular down in Miami, and all the stadium hostaging that's happened, all the fights between the players' associations and the union, let alone all the racial stuff going back for 100 years. But it really is amazing how many baseball owners over the course of time have been these megalomaniac, meddling, wannabe heroes, want to be involved in baseball, and and the stories in their wake around the business of baseball being sort of itchy, sleazy, not nearly as sanitized as the legend of the hallowed halls of Wrigley and all of that romantic stuff we see in Cooperstown, right?
Yeah, well, it can be a little bit of a self-selecting group. I mean, you look at Charlie Finley, and he steamrolled many smaller players en route to his making his fortune. He was an insurance guy, and many rich guys do this. They got to squash the competition ruthlessly in order to establish themselves, and that's the kind of personality that succeeds in those situations. And you add to that the need to buy a major league ball club for whatever reasons you spur that.
Now, he was obsessed with that, right? Like, I mean, he chased that team from Philadelphia to Kansas City to Oakland, and his destiny. It really is an incredible story of another era, right, in baseball, where you had to milk cows in the big leagues, and he did lose money, right? I mean, in Kansas City, maybe some of it was on purpose, but, those ballparks, I look back at the old pictures and the old Ken Burns video and stuff, as much as I was all romantic about collecting a 1964, a Topps card or whatever, there were a lot of empty seats behind a lot of those stage pictures as well, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. In Kansas City and Oakland alike. Finley is the guy who moved the team from Kansas City to Oakland, even though many people around baseball told him it was a bad idea, that the Bay Area could not support 2 teams. And suddenly, the championship A's are still drawing fewer than 10,000 fans, way more often than they're drawing more than 10,000 fans. It got so bad that Finley had to invent something he called a half-price family night, which was every single Monday night. Every ticket was half price. And those nights did very well, but it came at the expense of every other night of the week. So it never really ended up boosting attendance that much.
I thought your background on, well, first off, everything, right? I've written a couple of books. I've written a book on Peter Angelos that I've sort of, put out piece by piece on the internet. And, I don't even know where the market is for books and for authors and people that do this. I certainly have never gotten rich off my books, but they have been very rich experiences for me. And I've written about the two Ravens championships. I've been intimately familiar with a lot of the business side of it and the drafting side of it. And, putting together a story. And you've gone back 35, 40 years in putting this story together. What's the genesis of this for you, Jason? I always wonder because it's a great story, and it's a story untold to me that I always sort of wondered, and I really was fascinated by Lords of the Realm and by the lunatic that owned the Senators that moved them to Texas, and Ted Williams and Whitey Herzog and Billy Martin and those crazy stories of that era. That's why I fell in love with your book. But telling these stories through the eyes of Ken Holtzman and the Munich Olympics and I'll get to Reggie Jackson. I'm saving that for the end. I have my own Reggie story for you. But did you know any of these guys? Did you grow up a bubblegum card collecting A's fan like me, or no?
Well, I grew up a bubblegum card collecting fan, but I was across the bay and I was following the San Francisco Giants. This team was on the perimeter of my consciousness, but really it hit me that I needed to write this book when I was in Cooperstown, New York, doing some research for an unrelated project. And you've been to Cooperstown, you know.
Sure.
all those memorabilia shops lining Main Street. That's all they have there. And walking through those things, I was just surrounded by Yankees and Red Sox and Dodgers and Cubs. And it was really hard for me to even find evidence that this team, the only team other than the New York Yankees, ever to win 3 straight championships, I couldn't even tell that they even existed. This was
so their story really wasn't told other than like on microfiche and maybe some Sports Illustrated takeout, and there were plenty of those. I mean, dude, they were on the cover of the magazine just because they flashed those crazy gold jerseys and the white. I mean, they were on the cover of Sports Illustrated a ton as I was a kid, as I remember it.
Oh, at the time they were. I'm talking about 5 years ago.
Right.
This team has been largely forgotten. There was a bunch. There's several good books written about this team, all prior to 1975, and almost nothing since. So to me, this was a story that needed retelling, and I think that's one of the reasons why all these players I talked to almost every major figure left alive from this team. I think that's why they were so eager to talk to me, because outside of someone like Reggie Jackson, their identities are tied up with the Oakland A's. And if the Oakland A's are forgotten to history, so more or less are them. And they opened up to help me tell what I think is a really compelling story.
So, dude, I went to 30 ballparks in 30 days 2 summers ago for the Bowmare Registry. My wife's a 2-time leukemia survivor, and we swabbed along the way. And when I walk into Oakland, modern-day Oakland, and I'll walk in there again 6 months from now, the Ravens are playing out there. We think they're going to play in Oakland, Jason, right? I mean, at this point. But I love the experience of going to a baseball or a football game or anything at that old dump. I like the fruit flies in the bathroom. I like that it's 50-50 whether the food's going to be fresh or not. I like getting off the BART. I like that it's dumpy, but the thing I love about it the most is when I walk in there, I feel like I'm on 33rd Street. I mean, it really feels like a time capsule. And, knowing all the history that's been there from Billy Ball and Billy Bean Ball and Moneyball and Charlie O Ball, it's never really worked, right? I mean, it's never really been captivating or electrifying in any way. And now the Giants of the modern era have truly been giants with Bochy and those guys over there fulfilling that promise that Bonds and those guys didn't get done. And, I mean, you go back to Cepeda and McCovey and, all of that era. The A's were still the best team ever in the Bay Area, and all the money those guys made when they disappeared, the Hall of Fame legacy that Jackson, Fingers, Hunter, and look, Tennis, Bando, those were great ball. Rudy, they were all really good ball players. You really did a hell of a job telling this story. But what compelled you to think that this made sense? I mean, this is a franchise that is not all that well supported. I mean, I love the story, but is there an audience for it?
Well, there is, from the standpoint that Nielsen Harcourt paid me a bunch of money to write the book, and it's selling really well right now. This is not a book strictly for Oakland A's fans. This is a book for people who love baseball. Like, the stories in here are really compelling. These guys, like you say, had fistfights with each other constantly through the entire run, and I came to realize that was part of the secret sauce. That they held each other so mutually accountable in so many really compelling ways that they wouldn't let slide lazy play on the field. They wouldn't let slide bad behavior in the clubhouse. And when they took each other to task for it, sometimes egos got bruised and fists would fly. I mean, way more frequently than with any other team I've ever covered. And it occurred to me as I was writing it, holy cow, this would be a great book if this was a last place team. Like the day-to-day drama was over the top. And putting it together with a 3-time champion and a team that I really think was more transformative than any other of its era. I mean, between the colorful uniforms and the facial hair and the attitudes, they almost single-handedly dragged baseball from the sport we picture in the late 1950s into the sport we picture in the late 1970s. You put that all together into one package, and I think this is a story for people far outside the Bay Area.
Well, for how much money Catfish Hunter wound up getting and Reggie Jackson, and it's like they took their little circus there and just brought it to Broadway, right? I mean, 5 years later, that act was playing, mixing in a Thurman Munson, mixing in a Greg Nettles, the brawls and Sparky Lyle and Billy Hunter, Billy Martin, not Billy Hunter. He went to Towson and did third base with the Orioles, but Billy Martin, and then mixing in Steinbrenner. I mean, Steinbrenner took Finley to like another level 5 years later, and really bringing back all of that Mantle and Ruth magic. But it sort of set a course for. Can you imagine this team in the era of social media? Can you imagine Charlie O. Finley on Twitter? Right?
It would be nuts. It would be nuts. But George Steinbrenner knew how to play the game in a way that Finley refused to. Baseball was under a brand new financial structure after 1975. That was inherent to Steinbrenner, and Finley rejected it from the jump. And so then 2 years later, Steinbrenner was winning championships with Finley's two best players, like you say, Reggie Jackson and Catfish Hunter. And I think that's a big part of the story as well.
Another thing that really strikes me as an Oriole fan and a kid growing up with these teams is the closeness with which this team had that they played in Modesto and they rode buses together in Montana and they knew each other for years and they were drafted into this sort of kingdom, right, where the owners always had control of the players. It was a different era, certainly for the Orioles teams that came in the next era that didn't make it up the hill in 72, 73, 74, but did in 79 and finally in 83, that in that era, those guys played together for long stretches of time. And I would think even going back and researching the book, those guys knew each other well. They weren't the rent-a-cap, buy a player at August 1st and, we have him for 8 weeks and try to win a championship with him like, let's say, maybe the Cubs did last year out of the bullpen. That didn't exist in that era. These guys were really kind of stuck together, weren't they?
Yeah, and what you say is really illustrative about how Reggie Jackson was perceived when he got to the Yankees. I mean, he came up with these guys in Oakland from the low minor leagues. They knew each other intimately, and his A's teammates understood that the guy was mostly bark and relatively little bite. He was the loudest guy in the room, and he had the biggest ego, but he didn't really want. He didn't have much ill will toward anybody. But he got to New York, and his new teammates in the Yankees had no idea what to make of him. And things got off to a terrible start and never really got better as far as personality clashes.
Well, that little half a summer in Baltimore didn't probably go too well either with Weaver and Palmer and those guys and sort of showing up whenever he wanted to and playing full out kind of sort of whenever he wanted to. So let me give you my Reggie story. So, obviously 72-3-4, we got ousted. Hunter pitched pretty well as I remember it, as did Blue Moon Odom and Vida Blue. And I mean, the stories about Vida Blue and money, by the way, are just fantastic. The book is dynastic, bombastic, fantastic. fantastic. Jason Turbo is the author also of the Baseball Codes, and you can follow him at Dynastic Book out on Twitter. And you can find this book literally anywhere, Amazon. You can use our Give a Spit app as well and help our friends at There Goes My Hero, as well as Jason Turbo, who did a great job of writing this book. So Reggie Jackson, my dad hated him. He came to Baltimore, and then we all hated him, and then he went to New York, and we hated him more. But I was 10, 11, 12, and I wanted to wear number 9, right? I saw the Bad News Bears and Kelly Leak. I wanted to wear number 44. I didn't like the Yankees, but I loved baseball. I was also a Brett guy. I was a big Rod Carew guy. I was a big Sixto Lescano. I loved players. I loved all the teams. But the Orioles were my team, and Reggie Jackson, like, I literally wore his number as a Little League player. And then in 1986, I had my first press pass. I was 18 years old with Ted Patterson, and I was in the locker room when he was a California Angel, and he came in as a pinch hitter in a game of the week Saturday afternoon with Ted Kubek, and I guess Garagiola probably was in town at that point, and he fouled a couple of fastballs off from Don Ossie after the Orioles acquired him that year when they spent all the money on Lacey and Fred Lynn, and he popped up with like the bases loaded in the 8th inning pinch hitting, and after the game the media were around him, and here's an old sort of broken down 1986 male pattern baldness Reggie. His baseball cards were worth a fortune at that point. I know you know that. And he dressed me down in the nastiest tone I've ever been spoken to by anyone, and I've done sports radio for 25 years. It was kind of unsettling to me. And here was this guy that I don't want to say I idolized him, but I didn't think he could be as mean as he was. F-bombs, who the F are you? Like, all of this stuff went on. And a couple of the media people sort of called him down off of me because they knew me. I probably did look 14 at the time, honestly. But he was such a jerk that when his house burned down, I actually cheered about it on the radio. So, Reggie, to read all these stories about him fighting and anti-Semitic comments that he made in the direction of Jewish players who were his teammates, and fist fights that were, not staged at all. Reggie sort of carried that everywhere, even to when I found him as a broken down 40-year-old, soon-to-be Hall of Famer, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, he could definitely be a jerk. Worth pointing out that the guy he got into a fist fight with in 1972 in Arlington Stadium, Mike Epstein, was not a guy he had come up with through the minor leagues. Epstein had just been acquired the year before. And so they didn't know each other as well as Reggie and his other teammates. The guy just rubbed people the wrong way. And if you didn't understand him, it's easy to take great offense at him because he is greatly offensive. He continues to be that way.
Well, I mean, and these guys all sat with you and told, I don't want to say they're dirt, but they exposed these stories that maybe were picked at a little bit 40 years ago, but stories that maybe a lot of these guys would have probably preferred to not tell again, right? I mean, as an author of a book going back to that, I didn't have that issue in writing my books. I mean, they were fresh. They were about championships. Most of the vibes were warm and fuzzy. When you win, it's always more fun to write that story. This team won, but I think even 40 years later, getting them all in a room together probably is awkward or a little strange, maybe?
I don't think it is. I mean, they have gotten together in a room 3 years in a row. The A's had 40th anniversary reunions.
And it's good now. It's good.
They get along famously because they don't have to hold each other accountable anymore. Now they can just look back at at the fun portions of the old times and hopefully ignore some of the darker moments.
With the loss of Sparky Anderson a couple years ago, and I had the good fortune to spend part of an afternoon with Tommy Lasorda on my tour a couple years ago out in L.A., and, these sort of old-school managers. I did the last ever sit-down with Earl Weaver a few weeks before he passed away, and he was, very with it and really cool and nicer to me than maybe his reputation or he had been at previous points in his life. Dick Williams, I mean, there's a guy there who held multiple jobs and, managed to somehow managed Charlie Finley because he knew he could get a championship there, and that was something that he sought. Another incredible character in this Kelly Green and Gold carousel that you wrote about, Jason.
Sure. Non-stop characters, and I think you hit on the ability to win a championship, the possibility of winning a championship really superseded anything. These guys got in fistfights with each other. Part of what held them together was the fact that they disliked the owner more than they disliked each other. No matter how much they hated each other, they hated Charlie Finley more. And part of it was they knew they could go out and win a title again. All they had to do was to avoid beating each other onto the disabled list.
One of the great teams, the Oakland A's of the early 70s, chronicled dynastic, bombastic, fantastic. The author is Jason Turbo. You can find him at Dynastic Book. Dude, I know our time is short. Next time we're going to talk about some current baseball, but I love going into the Wayback Machine. You make me hate the Oakland A's all over again in some lovable way,
Glad to inspire such loathing in you.
Hey, I'm glad that you gave me some time. I really have enjoyed the book, and I'm recommending it to folks.
Happy to talk to you anytime.
You got it, man. Jason Turbo, that's Turbow. The book is Dynastic, Bombastic, Fantastic. Also the author of the Baseball Codes. Next time, we're going to talk about the unwritten rules and Manny Machado and all the nonsense that goes on in baseball and brushback pitches and all that. Sign stealing, all of my favorites. I'll come up with a whole top 10 list for him. But the book is good. If you're watching out on our Facebook Live or our YouTube WNS TV channel, it is very green and gold. All of my Dundalk High friends will recognize it for what it is, as well as Green Bay Packers fans. We do have our WNST road trips now available out at WNST.net under the road trips tab. Crazy enough, right? Green Bay, Nashville, Minnesota, London, all on sale, all $100 off, but you got to act right now. You can throw me an email. You can check it out online. If you have any questions, we're happy to help you out. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram. We are promoting our road trips. We are awaiting all of these new baby birds that the Ravens will be drafting, as well as Stanley Cup playoffs and the NBA playoffs with the Wizards. It's a real busy time around here. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, and we are AM 1570 right here in Towson in Baltimore, hon. And we never stop talking Baltimore sports.